The news, as you probably all know, is that Assembly Bill 243 is a cannabis cultivation regulatory bill, and today it will be heard in the Agriculture Committee. From my perspective, as a third generation cannabis farmer, this represents a monumental step forward. We're not talking about the public safety issue. We're not talking about some of the other concerns. We are talking about the cultivation of cannabis and how it relates to us on the farm. And we're talking about a future where we can actually be treated like farmers. And so, in that note, we do have the shirts. If you are a farmer, please take an I Am a Farmer shirt. And if you are a patient or a consumer or just a community member who loves your farmer, we made shirts for that too. Assembly Bill 243 is not perfect. No bill ever is. Nothing in politics ever happens exactly the way you want it with every single detail just right. We do have some concerns on this bill. We have voiced them with the author and with several of the committee members and other friends in the building. And so I just want to really underscore, there are problems and we are working on them. Some of our close allies and friends have chosen to oppose this bill. But today, we've chosen to support the bill, and we are asking that everybody who wants to support the bill, rather than each of us individually getting up and speaking our support, let's be very professional, let's be very disciplined, and let's do something they don't expect of us as a cannabis community. And when we voice our support, let's all rise together, show our support, and let's all sit together. Rather than making this take longer than it needs to and being disruptive, let's be very unified in expressing that support. And of course, if you choose to go the other direction, I leave you to your own devices there. Yes, Karen?
Yeah, so when you say expressing support and all rising and sitting down, what are those action points? Just how does that process?
Sure, so as we understand it, it seems it's expected that I will get a minute or two to express our support. And in those comments, I will say briefly why it is that we, as an organization, have chosen to support. And I'll mention that several of our members, supporters, friends, community members are here to support this bill as well. And
that's what we get.
Exactly,
okay.
And then we'll close from there. So thank you for the clarification on perspective.
You guys stay on part of it.
Here, baby, like 12:30.
We were good. Yeah, we were good. We're all, both my friend and I are late, so she had to do that.
On three, say agriculture. 1, 2. No, we got it. On three, we're saying agriculture. 1, 2, 3. Agriculture! Woo!
To the public and to colleagues, today's hearing is televised, so we will be on California channel and internal. And I understand there's been a request from members of the audience to take pictures and even to take some video. That's okay, and I will allow that as long as it's not disruptive. So if you can just be just aware of everybody
that's surrounding you as you do that, I would appreciate that. So. Having said that, Mr. Wood, we are moving on to item number 1, AB 243, medical marijuana cultivation.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members.
We have a quorum. Let me hold you there. We are limiting testimony for 3 and 3 on each side for this particular bill. So I would ask, I know a lot of people traveled a long way to express their opinion. I would ask that when the official testimony is over on each side and when we call for either support or opposition, if you could do your best, we have this mic set up here for folks to come and express their opinion. If you could do your best to limit to either support or opposition, that would be great. Just your name, your affiliation, and if you support or oppose the bill. If you feel compelled that you have to say more than that, I would just ask that you be mindful that we have a lot of people who are here today that want to be heard as well. So I would ask that you keep that in the back of your mind, and if someone goes a little too long, I may ask you to wrap it up. I'm not trying to rush you out, but we do have a lot of bills to hear today, and we do have a lot of people that are here for this bill in particular. So I would just make that comment and ask for your help and cooperation there. So, Mr. Wood, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Before you now is Assembly Bill 243. In 1996, voters approved Proposition 215, also known as the Compassionate Use Act. As such, a person can grow marijuana for medical use under a prescription, referred to as a 215 card. And over time, a system has evolved where patients can purchase medical marijuana at dispensaries. For the past 18 years, medical marijuana growers and medical marijuana patients have lived in a murky gray area where state and federal law are in direct conflict, and quite frankly, it has prevented us from establishing reasonable environmental protections to already impacted watersheds. Currently, there are very few environmental regulations for medical marijuana growers. Adding to that, large, flourishing, and destructive grows by people motivated only by profit, and we are seeing unimaginable environmental damages to the North Coast region of the state. We are seeing unpermitted land grading, road construction, illegal stream diversions, discharge of sediments and pollutants into waterways, as well as contaminations of water and soil by pesticides, rodenticides, fertilizers, and fuels. Mammals, birds, and fish are dying horrible deaths because of poisons left to protect crops that are left behind long after growers leave an area. Last year, a thriving and healthy stream, Sproul Creek in Humboldt County, went dry for the first time that anyone can remember, which devastated the water's ecosystem. Home to 5 endangered salmon species, including the coho salmon, unfortunately, state officials believe the stream went dry from illegal diversions of marijuana cultivators. In an effort to protect the environment last year, the governor approved a $1.8 million appropriation to create a multi-agency pilot program in Northern California called the Watershed Enforcement Team, or WET. The WET consists of a partnership of the State Water Resources Control Board, the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to minimize harm to wildlife and watersheds. AB 243 will continue the momentum of WET by establishing parameters that can guide statewide standards. My bill directs all 9 regional water quality control boards to develop environmental protections to address wastewater discharges from marijuana farms. But we cannot address the environment without looking at the source, cultivation. AB 243 also seeks to establish a regulatory system that places some basic parameters around the cultivation of medical marijuana. As written, my bill also establishes a program to help law enforcement properly identify medical marijuana plants. The bill also puts into place some basic standards for indoor and outdoor medical marijuana farmers by requiring a permit to be obtained to cultivate, minimum distance from schools, ensuring that farms are securely enclosed, posting requirement of a state-issued medical marijuana ID. As written, the county would run this program but can opt out of being the responsible entity, in which case a state agency would take responsibility for running the program. These recent amendments were my attempt to ensure local control and flexibility. Often at times I hear that one-size-fits-all approach rarely works for localities, especially for my rural communities. Amendments were an attempt to respond to that demand. I understand there are some concerns with my recent amendments, and I commit to working with stakeholders through their concerns. One was completely inadvertent. I meant to include cities as a regulatory agency. I did not mean for counties to be able to supersede municipal powers. So I am committed to make, in the next series of amendments, to add that cities can actually regulate medical marijuana cultivation in their cities without regard to the county. I also understand that there are a lot of stakeholders who have been working on marijuana issue for quite some time. But I feel that the environmental concerns have been left out of the conversation. My district is ground zero for marijuana activities, production, and environmental damages. My bill simply seeks to address the environmental issues affecting my district, where an estimated 65% of the marijuana consumed in the United States is grown. My recent amendments continue and expand my intent to create some environmental regulations around medical marijuana farms, and I believe that the cultivation oversight, potentially leading to control over a number of plants, is a way to protect water that is already in grossly over-affected watersheds. Here to speak in support, Reed Addis of Caltrat, Rico Mastrodonato from the Trust for Public Land, and Hezekiah Allen from the Emerald Growers Association. Thank you.
Great, thank you. First witness.
Thank you, Chair and members. Reed Addis on behalf of CalTrout. We're a state or nonprofit organization dedicated to the preservation and protection of native fish species here in California. We work in partnership with a lot of state programs to do conservation projects on the ground to improve the habitat of our waters, improve the flow of those waters, and in general try to improve the habitat in which the fish species thrive. We have increasingly, especially in the North Coast, as we've done our work, have run into a twofold problem from our perspective. One is the diversion of water out of rivers and creeks for the use of marijuana cultivators' land. And then on the flip side, the discharges of either soil and or chemicals from those operations back into the waters and creeks. As you can imagine, our frustration has been we work on with millions of dollars in some cases with the state on projects to restore that habitat, and then to find out a year or two later you come in and there's either no more water for the fish or the fish have been poisoned is really frustrating. I think what we have realized over a number of years is there are not all cultivators are the same. But we do believe a lot of these impacts really do tie back to this very special type of activity of marijuana cultivation. So we're here today in support of this measure because we think it goes a long way in creating a state policy around this issue. It focuses in on marijuana cultivators. It actually focuses in particular, and the reasons we like this, on the issues around discharge. We're also working with the author on maybe dealing with the issues of diversion. The photos we sent around here are just to give you a glimpse of what we're talking about. Not all of these operations are mom and pop shops. There's actually large-scale cultivation occurring, meaning there's a lot of water needed to be taken out of those rivers and creeks. You can also see we had one picture that shows really, if you will, a water with all kinds of chemicals left in it. That water both goes into the groundwater aquifers, but also leaks back into the creeks. So we appreciate this effort today. We're hopefully this committee will pass this measure out. We know there may be a couple more issues that need to be worked out, but we hope at the end of the day there's a appropriate set of policies between the state and the locals to address these environmental concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next witness.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. Rico Mastrodonato with the Trust for Public Land. We're a national conservation organization who has spent about 40 years in California and working on the North Coast. So we're intimately familiar with this issue. We're in strong support of AB 243 and appreciate Assemblymember Wood and his staff's openness to addressing on a policy framework for the environmental impacts of marijuana cultivation on the landscape. And as he mentioned, given his district is ground zero for this industry, that makes a lot of sense to us. Regarding this industry, this is a huge industry issue, and by all accounts, marijuana is the biggest cash crop in the state. In rural California, it probably is the biggest revenue generator in the state of California. And although we believe that most legal marijuana growers employ best practices to minimize the impact on the environment, there are massive illegal operations that are converting lands that are sensitive habitat and important watersheds to clear-cut toxic waste dumps, essentially. As Reed mentioned, the diversion of creeks and streams used by native trout are being used to store water and then discharging that water laced with unregulated pesticides and fertilizers onto the rivers, lakes, and streams and landscape. And to complicate this matter further from our perspective, we are certainly looking at recreational marijuana becoming legal in California as early as next year. So AB 243, we believe, is taking incredibly important steps to create a framework to address indoor and outdoor marijuana cultivation related to land conversion, grading, water usage, water quality, woodland and habitat protection. These are very important first steps, and TPL and the other environmental organizations, I think, are fully engaged with Assemblymember Wood to comprehensively address the environmental impacts. Medical and illegal cultivation of marijuana is incredibly profitable in California, and in our view, the cost for cleaning up the damage to land and water should be paid for by dollars generated by that industry, and we're working with Assemblymember Wood to figure that piece out. AB 243 is taking steps to address regulatory framework that will allow local and state officials to distinguish between those that are following the law and those that are not, and I think that's one of the most critical first hurdles to be cleared. We believe Assembly Member Wood is committed to being a champion on the environmental issues associated with cultivation. He's met with TPL several times and a number of other environmental organizations and has been open to ideas from our community, and we will continue to work with his office to address this incredibly important issue. So I urge your aye vote.
Thank you. Next witness.
Thank you, Chair, committee members. My name is Hezekiah Allen. I'm the Executive Director of the Emerald Growers Association. We are a rapidly growing association of medical cannabis farmers and related businesses. At this point, we represent 150 farmer members in 15 counties, and we have supporters that are patients and other businesses that are related in several more counties. Today, we have members from across the state. I counted 11 counties represented at our lunch today, and we've actually asked our members not to each speak individually. I will ask them to rise and support when I close my comments, just in respect of time. Over the last 9 months, we have worked very closely with the State Water Board and the regional water boards and the Department of Fish and Wildlife in developing the watershed enforcement team. The commitment to outreach, to collaboration, and to acknowledging that there is an environmental and public safety crisis caused by this unregulated agriculture has been very empowering to us as a community. It's very difficult for our community of farmers to come out of the regulated gray area and into this conversation. And being here today is a tremendous honor. And it's a tremendous pleasure. Thank you, Jim Wood, for bringing this bill to the committee. I also want to note that being here in the Agricultural Committee is a tremendously important step for us. For several years, I've been working on this committee or on this issue, and the response has been sort of we've been treated as the bad actors. We've been treated as criminals. And to be here today to really be able to say, no, we are small farmers. We are small farmers that are unregulated largely at this point. And we are here in support of increased regulation. We are here today extending our hands and our good faith, asking to work in partnership with the state government, with local governments, with local jurisdictions to solve this crisis, and to work together to bring our businesses into regulation and to move forward into a well-regulated community of small businesses. And so I really want to say that we've started here with natural resources. We've started looking at the environmental impacts, and that is a fantastic first step. We're working with the author. We've proposed some amendments and ideas for how we may help expedite this transition to regulation through access to existing incentive programs that exist for other farmers in the state, how we might encourage our membership to more quickly move into these regulatory programs. And our hope is that with the momentum we build here with AB 243, that we can very quickly move this entire industry, cannabis cultivation, cannabis farmers, into a reasonably regulated environment where labor, where the environment, where our businesses have the certainty that we need, and we can start to build a future that really does work for our businesses, for the watersheds, and for all of the people of the state of California. So with that, I would ask the folks here that have come to support this bill with us to please rise and show your support. There's several more, dozens of farmers in the hallway that couldn't make it in the room today, and thank you for the time, and we do urge an aye vote today. We are going to work with the author to dial in some specifics. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. I understand that's probably the rest of the group?
That sounds like them.
Other witnesses in support?
I think
If you could just state your name and who you're with and your position.
Mr. Chair, members, Patrick Leathers, Senior Counsel with Clean Tech Advocates. I'm pleased to be here on behalf of two clients, Conscious Cannabis Ventures. The CEO is Dr. Jonathan Cachet, a neuroscientist, and Heritage Associates, a group of medical marijuana practitioners in the legal community and arts and heritage, and that is part of Heritage Associates. I will talk about that later, so I will introduce Dr. Jonathan Cachet in support of this measure, and thank you.
Great. Next witness, if you just your name and your position on the bill.
Support if amended.
Great. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Paul Mason with Pacific Forest Trust. We also appreciate the effort and support the bill.
Thank you.
Charles Lee Boughton. I am
support of a bill for farmers, but I have to stipulate that medical patients who such as are low-income kids should not have to be forced to pay permit fees and such like that, because it does not signify people who are doing it strictly for medicine rights and not to profit off of it. And I think you guys, by putting prices on it, you're making us have to be considered something that we're not into business aspects of it, just for the medical virtues of it for ourselves and not for farmers who want to profit. So I think you guys need to consider it. People who are truly using it as a medical needs should not be forced to pay fees to do that, because that puts us in the category of being drug dealers, and we're not.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Paul Smith with the Rural Counties Association. I want to start off by saying we are in support of the bill, particularly sections 1 and 3 of the bill. Those were the introduced versions. We've been in conversations with Mr. Wood for about a week about section 2. I will say that those amendments are problematic for counties. Nevertheless, we've committed to working with him to resolve those concerns. We hope to spend the next several days doing so, but we want to let the committee know that despite our support, there are some concerns with the provisions of the bill, and we appreciate the extension his office has given us to try to make a workable situation. I will just say our rural counties, where Mr. Wood alluded to, we are the hotbed of cultivation. We want a licensing structure. We want to make a system work, and we're committed to doing that.
Thank you. Next witness, just name and position, please.
Nate Bradley, from the California Cannabis Industry Association. We haven't had a chance to look over all the newest amendments yet. We support the bill in concept, and very thankful for the author for bringing this issue forward.
Thank you. Next witness in support. Are there any more?
Chair Committee, Julia Carrera, the Small Farmers Association. Nice to meet you, and nice to be here after 3 years working with the Agricultural Committee. And finally, here we are, thanks to EGA to help us get in here. We are in support of our Assemblyman's bill. He is very knowledgeable of what's going on. He's going to be, hopefully, and there will be an invitation to all of you in the committee as well as the Capitol to one of our farms this year like last year. We do have some simple concerns that we think we can work with Tony and Assemblyman with. And very quickly, Section 2 is our self-regulatory program. We are happy to see it in the bill. There are farmers. We have approximately almost 600 now throughout the state, mostly producer counties, from Santa Cruz north to the border, from the eastern Sierra foothills to the coast. And we are all operating under Section 2 quite happily, quite easily. It just is like changing a religion or something. You can do it. Our farmers are happy, and we're happy to be here. Please vote to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other witnesses in support?
Mr. Chair and members, Tim Cromartie on behalf of the League of California Cities. We have no position on the bill at this time. We do, however, have significant concerns based on the impact that the language in Section 2 might have on municipal sovereignty. However, we are in dialogue with the author's office, and we're confident that we can reach an agreement.
Thank you very much. Next witness in support.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Eric Salerno. I'm with the Yuba Patients Coalition. We're a political action committee. We have approximately 1,000 plus medical marijuana patients who do cultivate in our county. I am in support with amendments. I believe that the Water Resources Board sent a representative to our county to explain the program. We're in agreement with environmental impacts that are being associated with medical marijuana cultivation. Something does need to change, so I would ask you to support the bill moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just ask, as you come up, please, just your name and your position on the bill.
Carrie Becker, and I support the bill.
Perfect. Thank you.
Supervisor John Fenley, Trinity County, Southern Trinity, District 5. With amendment, I support this bill, specifically Section 2.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, or good afternoon. Doug Teeter, Supervisor, Butte County. Again, just like Trinity, I support with amendment of Section 2. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Matt Clifford with Trout Unlimited, and we support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other witnesses in support? Seeing none, we'll go to opposition. I'd like to call the opposition to to come up, please. If we could make some room, please.
So I'm Dale Geringer, a director of California Normal and one of the original sponsors of the Compassionate Use Act, Proposition 215. We actually support the intent of this bill. We really think it's important that the medical cannabis industry be regulated like other agriculture, and this bill would go in that direction, in a useful direction. Our problem comes from one particular provision, that it requires permits of individual patients. This is really a violation of Proposition 215. Voters' initiative, patients have the right to cultivate with a doctor's recommendation. No permits can be required by the state. And there's even a Supreme Court decision on point on this, the People versus Kelly decision, which struck down as unconstitutional an attempt to put numerical state limits on the amount patients could cultivate for personal use. If this bill were amended to eliminate the permits for individual patients and just apply to collectives who grow for others, we would be able to support this bill.
Thank you very much. Next witness.
Yes, I'm Lynette Davies with Crusaders for Patients' Rights, and our concerns also on the patient base is that there hasn't been an allowance for the patients. We also are looking at what's in the bill right now as far as going to the sheriff's office in order to get your permits. Our sheriffs are not the type, our sheriffs shouldn't be doing the type of clerical work. We're looking at our sheriffs being involved in crime in our county, and we think that that is something that should probably be reviewed, because it also is one of those fear factors where you want somebody who's cultivating to go to your sheriff's department. Some of the others has to do basically with the zoning, that it has to be zoned, and that we're worried about people that have cancer will not be able to have their medication in their own homes and be able to cultivate. And because of the counties and cities that have been placing bans, I wanted to bring up also that today, just today, the Californians for Compassionate and Sensible Access have filed the first initiative at the Attorney General's office as a Patient's Bill of Rights. And I'm not going to read the whole thing here, but I will read number 2, which says that no state or local agency or body shall pass any law that impedes a patient's ability to obtain or cultivate cannabis in any manner that is consistent with any other floral cultivation and business in said jurisdiction. And what we're looking at is that cultivation in Proposition 215 was given as a right, not as a privilege. So we do support, Assembly members would, for the rural farmers, especially having the 99 plant count limit on that. However, we are looking at patients not being covered adequately at this bill. So we're opposed only until it's amended, because I think if you have the right idea, I think you have the right access to be able to do it, and just a few tweaks on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would ask any other opposition, please just come state your name, affiliation, and position.
Good afternoon. Kimberly Cargile with the Sacramento chapter of Americans for Safe Access. We do oppose it as it stands now, but we'd be happy to support it with amendments, some of which you have already heard today. Thank
Wonderful. Thank you.
Rich Miller from Health Education and Legal Patients' Rights in El Dorado County. American Alliance for Medical Cannabis opposed this bill unless amended. We appreciate all the work that's going there. We know it's there. Just got to get a little more tweaking here, and we'll have it ready to go. Thank you for your support.
Thank you.
Kathy Thielen with Yuba County ASA. With amendments, we could probably support the bill, but as it stands, no.
Thank you.
Sarah Wildwood. I'm a small farmer, produce farmer in Santa Barbara County, and I think that the intent of the bill is very positive. However, it's addressing two different things. First of all, it's illegal cultivation of marijuana that is destroying watersheds. Just as in where I am, orchards will divert water there, and so it's happening all over because of the drought. So we have that issue, the illegal cultivation of marijuana, and then also an attempt to regulate legal cultivation of marijuana. So I would support the bill if they were separated out. And I do believe that our current legislation already covers illegal diverting of water. And if you want to regulate cultivation of marijuana, that should be a totally separate bill.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. Any other witnesses in opposition? Please, your name and position.
Debbie Tharp, I'm a patient. I oppose this thing. I approve the intent of it. You're right, we do need to regulate, but this is giving a little bit too much power to counties to just enforce all and out bans. So this is not going to help the patients. It's not going to help anybody. It's not going to. You're just going to end up with another mess where you have to deal with people that can't enforce the situation. Because if you put together an unenforceable law that people aren't going to follow, you're not regulating it. So it's going to have a little more common sense before
Thank you.
we agree with it.
Thank you very much. Any other witnesses in opposition? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the committee. Mr. Quirk.
Member Wood, I'll ask about what your approach will be to the opposition. Let's start first with the fact that we might have individual patients with just a few plants. They're worried about large fees. It may be reasonable to have them permitted, I'm not sure, but certainly a large fee wouldn't be. And again, Mr. Geringer has said under 215 that you can ask them to do that. Perhaps you could address that.
Well, I think we are looking at I don't want to take anything away from patients. I don't want to make it difficult for patients. So it's not the intent of the legislation to actually restrict access for patients. If someone is going to be growing, 3, 4, 5 plants or whatever the jurisdiction decides in their backyard or whatever, I'm not as concerned about that. That isn't really what I'm after in this bill. I'm after something completely different. So I respect that, and I will be happy to work with people. But in my own city, where I was the mayor last year, we actually did have an ordinance that we passed that we did not go to a permitting, but it did limit the number of plants that people could grow within the city jurisdiction. And this is basically, from my perspective, these are land use issues. And our legislation was based on land use. And that is what I am seeking to do here. This is around land use.
So I understand that, and I understand you're after the big actors, but what will you do to get the patients to feel comfortable and to address the 215 issue?
I'm happy to work with groups. I have had some patient advocacy groups in my office, and I will continue to have an open door and continue to work with people. It's not my intention to take medication away from patients.
Right. And then the sheriffs are the permitters. I could be concerned that you might have a sheriff in a county, and we have 58 counties, that simply wouldn't issue the permits, would have the authority but then not issue. How would you address that?
Well, I think it's a matter of intent. It is true. Even when you look at Colorado, where it's legal now, there are lots of counties in Colorado who have simply chosen not to allow cultivation in their counties. All I have to do is look it up. So if a county sheriff or a county did not want to issue this, or did not even want to deal with the program, the opt-out or the fallback is that a state agency could take over administration of the program.
That's right. I remember now.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there is a fallback there. So.
Yeah, but my concern is that they get the authority and then refuse to issue the permits. So they haven't turned down the authority, but they're not using it either.
I would say that based on Proposition 215, there are probably protections there that protect patients.
Okay, fine. And then finally, these grows are already illegal, and I'm certainly going to support your bill. The problem is, how will this help us get rid of these illegal grows if we can't do it now when they're already illegal?
Well, I think there are people who are actually. I believe there are people that are actually trying to do this in a legal way. We after Prop 215 passed, we haven't done anything. We haven't created any sort of regulatory mechanism around this. So we created this incredible gray area where we haven't offered any guidance.
Yeah, but if they're diverting stream waters, if they're putting poisonous chemicals out, clearly that's illegal.
Correct.
And I know people do try to do this, but my concern is that there do you have a source of money from these permits to fund increased regulation?
We were hoping to actually, be able to, from funding of a program, creating a framework for a program to be able to create resources at some point to go after the illegal part. That is a part of this bill that we are still working on, looking for a funding mechanism so that we can find the resources through a process that will allow us to go after the really bad ones. I think a critical part of this, one of the challenges that they're certainly seeing in Colorado is how do you identify what are considered legal grows under the law, and so that's why I looked at. I'm not wedded to this particular version, but looking at a program where they have a zip tie, where you actually can label the plant. Very easy for law enforcement to go in somewhere and say, "Ooh, okay, all the plants are labeled," and so we can track those with numbers back to the sheriff's department or the city, because as I was Mr. Cromartie with League of Cities, so we have a way of tracking that. But if you don't have a tag on your plant, it's clearly not legal and would not be legal under this regulation, and therefore would be subject to some sort of intervention.
Thank you. For those of us those in the audience who came today, really appreciate it. Also appreciated that you stood as a crowd instead of coming up one by one. I will tell the audience that I share a seat in the legislature with Jim. We sit next to one another. He is extremely ethical. He works hard. He's very intelligent. He will solve these problems with your bill. And with that, I'll move the bill.
Great. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second. Next, we have Mr. Dolly, then Mr. Cooper.
Well, I want to thank the author for bringing this bill forward. I'm a farmer, and I'm also somebody who sat on a board of supervisors for 16 years and dealt with propositions aren't put together perfect, and there's a lot of conflicts with counties and cities. We had zoning issues, obviously, and that's what's brought us to this point. So I commend you for bringing this bill forward. In the last 2 years that I was in the legislature, there's been a lot of talk about it, but we never got to this point, so I appreciate that. I also get an opportunity to look at this bill again. It's going to be double referred to Toxics and Environment, which I'm the vice chair of. So I do have some problems with your bill. Obviously, I know you're who I've worked with, talked to you personally, and I know that you will be working on those issues that we have identified. But I have 9 counties, and they all would like to have some uniform base. So, and the growers too, they'd like to know what they can do. So it's not this county versus that county, different laws out there and different zoning ordinances. And so I appreciate the fact. I'm going to lay off your bill today, and I know you get another shot at it in ESTM, but I really do appreciate you coming forward and bringing this bill forward, because I think it's time. I think that both sides, the people who don't like it at all and the people who don't like the environment getting tore up, we need a statewide piece of legislation that helps counties, cities, and the growers know where they're at. So I appreciate that. I'll be laying off and look forward to working with you on this bill in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper, then Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in support of your bill. Some questions have risen about local control. That's a big issue. Obviously, in my area here in the Central Valley, a lot of jurisdictions have limited or restricted totally outdoor grows. They must be grown indoors. So I do believe it is a land use issue with folks about it. And while we do need some type of statewide regulation, also we can't take it out of the hands of the locals, because the bottom line, they're the ones that are dealing with it every day. And, folks talked about putting with ABC, the state's taxed right now, and they have a hard time enforcing what they do currently. So, we're going to add more to it. So there's a lot of concerns there, but really just if you could key in on the local control issue.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Cooper. And it is, and that is a part of where I'm receiving some of the conflict with this. As a local elected, I often would look at things the state did and be frustrated because everything seemed to be a one-size-fits-all approach. So I am a big proponent of local control at the state or at the local level and at the county level. So it is a little troubling to hear that we want an overarching statewide program, but we want local control too. I step back and wonder how many overarching great statewide programs do we really like, and if we have an overarching statewide program that limits local control, at some point I think people are going to come back and say, wait, that's not what I wanted. And so I'm open to talking about that, and maybe there is some sort of a hybrid there where the state has some overarching control, but that the locals retain control. I believe that, and in reference to the folks that we're talking here about, patients' rights and things, I believe that these land use issues are rights, not necessarily privileges at times. I mean, you have to be respectful of the land. You have to be respectful of the laws. And so it is, I think it's really critical that we, and fundamentally in government, you look at that development is a right and not necessarily a privilege.
And just to add on, in the Sacramento area, one of the reasons some of the suburban communities passed restrictive legislation, we had a number of marijuana ripoffs where we had a lot of homicides here. It's a real issue that's gone on, numerous documented cases throughout the Sacramento Valley region, and that's why jurisdictions passed those tough ordinances to prevent that. So it's a real problem here. So you're right, what fits the rural community doesn't necessarily fit the suburban community.
Right. Thank you. Vice Chair Gallagher.
Well, Assemblyman Wood, I appreciate that you're trying to tackle this issue, and it is a big issue. As a former county supervisor, I've dealt with this issue pretty extensively in Sutter County, and my northern counties have been dealing with it for several years now. My concern with this bill is really with regard to Section 2. And I know you're saying that you want to support local control and provide that local flexibility, but Section 2, in my reading, does just the opposite. It really establishes Mendocino's policy and makes it sort of a statewide status quo for all counties to follow, including establishing a permit program and the tag program. And that may work for Mendocino County, and that's how they've decided to approach this issue. But it doesn't work for all other counties. And in fact, in a lot of other counties, and I think this is a real distinction we have to think about, is many counties have opted not to have a permit program because by issuing a permit, you could run into federal problems because growing marijuana is still against the law federally. And the counties don't want to be put in a position where they are permitting something that is illegal by federal law. So a lot of the counties have adopted ordinances that are set up as nuisance ordinances. They're not approving or disapproving of the grow. They're just dealing with it as a public nuisance. This bill in Section 2 sets up a permit program that counties have to adopt. That puts them in a bind. So that's one big issue. It also incorporates collectives into the law. That's not all counties allow for collective grows. And I think there's a very good argument that this doesn't allow for revenue. Prop 215 doesn't allow for revenue generation. It allows patients to grow for themselves and their caretakers to grow for them, but not to allow revenue generation. And one of the witnesses spoke earlier about how this is the greatest revenue generator and cash crop. Well, that's a problem because that's not even allowed under state law, as I understand it. It's supposed to be patients growing for themselves, caregivers growing to help support the patient. It's not supposed to be a revenue-generating industry. I think those are really the biggest issues. Is this kind of establishes a one-size-fits-all for counties as a status quo. And with that section 2 in there, the other provisions I think everybody's fine with, because it does allow, like your section 1. To me, it's almost somewhat inconsistent, because in section 1 you're saying you got to follow local and state ordinances, but then in section 2 we're saying, but locals have to adopt this program. Why not just allow locals to follow the program that they've already adopted, which many counties already have? And there are counties who have actually banned cultivation. So does this mean that they have to follow this when their locality has decided that they're not going to allow outdoor cultivation? I think that's a problem, and an assault on local control. So I want to work with you. I want to, find a way to make this work for everybody. But with Section 2 in there, I can't support the bill. And I'd ask you, if you would consider maybe removing that at this point and then working on some different language going forward. But if that's in the bill and that's what I'm having to vote on today, I can't support it.
Well, I appreciate your comments. First of all, Prop 215 doesn't cover collectives, and the collectives are the ones making the money. So that just as a point of clarification from my perspective, with all due respect. So it is entirely possible that a county that has decided to ban cultivation could establish a program that actually issues zero tags. You could do that. The county has control over how many plants they authorize. So you could establish a program in a county with zero tags. I'd say that's the ultimate in local control. You could have as many plants as you want as well. If you default to the state, if a county defaulted to the state and decide they did not want to do any part of this program, then there would be a default of 99 plants. So my hope is that people will that there would be flexibility and they will look at that. I am open to working on this. When I started this in essence is meant to be an environmental bill. And I realized very quickly that you cannot deal with the environmental consequences of cultivation without addressing cultivation itself. And that's the conundrum I find myself in. So I continue to, I learn more every day, let me tell you.
Just follow up to that, and I understand that, Assemblyman Wood. One problem is that the environmental problem, for a large part, is happening by illegal grows.
Correct.
And so, we really got to get at, as I think others have already talked about, not the people who are following the local ordinances and doing things properly, but those who are not, and who just completely ignore it. And by the way, if you're illegally diverting water right now, you're not a farmer, you're a criminal. And you're making it harder for all of us to survive this drought. And that is, it should be said, that is not something that should be promoted in any way, shape, or form. And really, our government should be doing something about that and penalizing and going after those who are illegally diverting water. But, again, I would tell the committee, with this language, this is not a local control. This does not allow local control. It implements a status quo program for all counties and undermines the local ordinances that have been passed by several of our counties, I would say by most of our counties in California.
Thank you. Assemblymember Dodd, then Grove.
Yeah, I would like to thank Assemblymember Wood for bringing up this important ordinance. I do note that it is an environmental bill, and I do suggest that these are probably more illegal grows, but my guess is not totally. There are some, as far as local control, there are communities throughout Northern California, for example, in Lake County, in my district, where this is a very serious problem. And there's been initiatives, there's been ordinances, and they've gone back and forth, and they are absolutely looking for direction from this committee, from this legislature, in this regard. So I am going to support this bill, and I think this is a good first step to, trying to, bring some sense and common sense. The other thing, as far as I totally agree with you about, it is a land use, and in other agricultural areas, they do have exemptions for small parcels. And so maybe there's some ideas there that could be helpful to the author.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Assemblymember Grove.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I know you've put a lot of thoughtful consideration into this, and I understand where you're coming from. I can't say it as eloquently as my colleague did, the vice chair, but I have an issue with the local control issue. My particular county, 12 plants, that's it. They arrest you. I mean, it's our county is very non-cultivation county. And so, just trying to communicate with the sheriff here is where his thoughts were on this from a local perspective in my county board of supervisors. They do believe, as my colleague said, that this is a one-size-fits-all issue. They don't believe they do have a huge problem with Section 2. They do believe that if the county board of supervisors choose to set up a program, that the bill language is vague enough to say that somebody could challenge that, and it can be referred to the state agency designated by the governor, and which might supersede local control that we have in our county. So the rest of the stuff, I think if you're diverting water, you should go to jail. Like my colleague said, you're a criminal. We have issues with water. All of us, I think, are serving on the Central Valley, except for Dali's up north. But we all serve and represent the Central Valley, where we have a shortage of water and our farmers are fallowing ground. So we get that from a water perspective. And I think that water needs to be controlled on this particular issue, just like it was in with any other farmer, or regulated like any other farmer. But the issue about the local control and taking it away from local counties bothers me tremendously. And if you could do something about that, I think you have a winner. Really good. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions, members? See none. Before you close, Mr. Wood, I'm sure there's several pieces you'd like to address. I just want to take a moment and thank you for taking this on. I know when we first discussed this a few months ago, you were pitching it to me as an environmental bill. And I think it is. And I believe it is, and I'll be supporting it because I believe it is. But in the back of my mind, I thought there's no way he's going to introduce this bill and not get caught up in the whole debate of medical marijuana and just marijuana at large. And we know that there could potentially be a ballot measure next year, which can make things even crazier next year. That's why I think this is a good first step, as I think Assemblymember Dodd mentioned. I think that this is a good opportunity for us to really sit down and thoughtfully think through how we deal with these measures. I know in Fresno County, we've struggled. I sat on the city council when we debated this, and it was a real struggle because it was neighbor against neighbor during that debate. And I'll never forget that. I know when Fresno County dealt with it, it was a similar issue. So I'm very familiar, like all of my colleagues, through local government, how difficult this is, and so I appreciate you taking it on. If I can just mention one piece on Section 2, I actually like the idea of permits because I think it helps local government know where everything is and where everybody is. And so I think it's helpful. I think it's important information to know, and I think it's important to have because let's be clear. Even if next year the voters decide to make recreational use of marijuana legal, it's still a federal crime. So there's still problems. There's still conflicts between the federal and state government that we're just not going to get beyond on our own in the state of California. We're still going to have issues. And we're seeing those issues play out in Colorado right now, issues like banks who are unwilling to take the large amounts of cash as deposits because they're afraid that their federal charters are going to get pulled. I mean, there are just so many issues that need to be worked out. Having said that, I think the piece that you've carved out makes a lot of sense, especially in this time of drought. And maybe it's true that it's the illegal grows that are the bigger offenders. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at those. I don't know if good actor is the right term, but those that are playing by the rules. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't be working with those individuals as a first step to deal with many of the issues that you presented today. And last but not least, I've made it a point as chair of ag to get out and do several tours and meetings with farm bureaus up and down the state. I met with Sonoma County Farm Bureau. We met for an hour and a half, and we talked about this for about an hour. So I know how real this issue is in your district and in the northern part of the state. Therefore, I'll be supportive of your bill. I know you're still negotiating, still fine-tuning. You have plenty of more committees to go through where you'll be able to do that, but I'm recommending an aye vote. I'm very supportive of what you're doing, and feel free to close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members. I did want to add, just before I get into a couple things, I have other supporters, and I think it's important to kind of hear the breadth and depth of the support for this bill. So I'm going to list you a few names here. The Associated Students of Humboldt State University, the Association of California Water Agency, the California Cattlemen's Association, the California Forestry Association, the California Narcotics Officers Association, CalTrout, Conscious Cannabis Ventures, Defenders of Wildlife, Emerald Growers Association, Heritage Associates, Humboldt Redwood Company, the Mendocino County Sheriff, Sierra Club, Nature Conservancy, Trout Unlimited, Trust for Public Land. This, in essence, is strong environmental support for what I firmly believe continues to be an environmental bill. So I thank you again for the opportunity to present. While there are multiple bills in this legislative session that seek to create significant regulatory structures for medical marijuana, environmental issues have received very little conversation or consideration in any of those bills. My bill addresses these critical environmental issues that are having enormous effects on the residents of the district I represent. I also seek to allow for significant control, and I've heard here today that maybe I missed some of that, but I'm committed to looking for ways to resolve that. And while I know that local jurisdictions are looking for significant guidance from the state, I fear that a one-size-fits-all approach without some local flexibility is doomed to fail. I recognize that the additional guidelines that seek to regulate the actual cultivation of marijuana creates conflicts with other pending legislation. But you have to start somewhere. I like the way I might be doing it wrong better than the way some people are not doing it at all. I commit to you and other stakeholders that I will work together to resolve these differences. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
That's a good line. I
stole.
Great. So if we can, with that closing, Madam Secretary, you please call the roll.
The motion is due pass to environmental safety and toxic materials. Perea?
Aye.
Perea, aye. Gallagher? No. Gallagher, no. Cooper?
Aye.
Cooper, aye. Dodd? Eggman? Grove? Grove, no. Irwin?
Aye.
Irwin, aye. Daly? Not voting. Daly, not voting. Quirk?
Aye.
Quirk, aye. Salas? Eggman? On AB 243, the motion is due pass to ESTM.
May I make a comment, Mr. Chair? It's too. But I will say I also have issues with the individual growers having different.
And I will say I get it.
It's on call. How many votes does it have?
One. It has one.
That vote is, the bill has 5. It needs 1 more, so we'll put it on call.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Appreciate
Mr.
it.
Wood.
My name is Hezekiah Allen. I am the Executive Director of the Emerald Growers Association. We just finished with what I would describe as a historic occasion. Assembly Bill 243, which is a bill to regulate cannabis cultivation, was heard in the Agriculture Committee in the State Assembly. It's the first time a cannabis regulatory bill has been heard in the Agricultural Committee. For us, as an association largely made up of small farmers, patients who depend on small farmers, and businesses who support small farmers, it was a tremendous breakthrough to have a conversation in the Ag Committee to talk about cannabis cultivation as agriculture, to talk about our businesses as farms, and to be able to really have that opportunity. It's the first time that it's happened after several years of asking that we be in this committee. It's really exciting to have finally had the opportunity. There's a couple of points of opposition that have been raised. On the one hand, local jurisdictions, counties and cities, want to be sure that they have the ability to restrict cannabis cultivation using their land use authority, perhaps more prohibitively than the state program would allow. And there's some language in Section 2 that makes it unclear whether the state program would supersede local jurisdictions or whether the local jurisdictions would have the authority to go above and beyond the restrictions provided by the legislation. So the counties and the cities particularly want to be sure that they have the authority to pass ordinances that would further restrict commercial cannabis cultivation. And that's something that while we may feel that every county in the state should have a commercial cannabis cultivation program, we recognize that it's going to be very difficult to pass a bill off of both floors and get it signed into law if it includes provisions that would allow the state to override the local jurisdictions. Our understanding is what the author expressed, that his bill is actually meant to empower the local jurisdictions, provide them with a framework, provide them with clarity and guidance on the subject, but ultimately allow them to make the specific decisions about how many plants, about where they'll be grown, and some of the more nuanced pieces. The other point of opposition came from the non-commercial cultivators, from patients who are growing exclusively for their own personal consumption. And that's an issue that we feel very strongly about. Non-commercial cultivation of cannabis should not be prohibited or restricted in any unreasonable way. And we have great confidence in the author and in the staff in the office that they will fix that, what we think was an oversight. We don't believe their intention was to limit non-commercial cultivation, and we expect that to be cleared up. Yeah, that is out to toxic materials, environmental safety toxic materials.
I'm going to go to Jim Wood's office. You should do that too.
Good. All right. Yeah. I'm going to do that.
Thanks for watching.